September 1st, 1943. At Rabaul Airfield on New Britain Island, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai froze, an intelligence report clutched in his hand. His one good eye, the other lost a year prior in a skirmish with American gunners, carefully scanned the text, which elicited a loud laugh from him in the sweltering operations tent. The Americans have developed a new fighter, so heavy it resembles a bomber, and so wide it looks like a transport plane. They've named it the Hellcat. Our intelligence suggests it weighs twice as much as our Zero. Clearly, this is another failure of American engineering. Through the tent's openings, he could see squadrons of his A6Mos lined up on perforated steel plates. These sleek, agile, and deadly machines had reigned supreme in the Pacific skies for 2 years. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen victim to the Zero's guns. And the Americans' latest attempt, this clumsy Hellcat, would be no exception. On that memorable morning, as Japanese naval aviators gathered for their routine briefing, none of them, including Saburo Sakai, had any inkling that in precisely 1 month the systematic destruction of their air force would begin. They were unaware that the arrival of the F6F Hellcat would turn the tide of the war in the Pacific. This aircraft, destined to achieve an incredible kill ratio of 19-1, destroying 5,123 enemy planes while losing only 270 of its own in air combat, was about to break the back of Japanese air power. The Hellcat was poised to redefine carrier warfare, proving that the Zero's dominance was built on flawed assumptions. The mathematics of air superiority were about to be rewritten by a plane that seemed to defy every principle the Japanese had perfected. It looked wrong and flew heavy, yet it was destined to herald the sunset of the rising sun. Within 6 months, the very pilots who now dismissed intelligence reports with irony would begin writing farewell letters home, realizing that an encounter with a Hellcat was statistically equivalent to death. The Japanese fleet's confidence in September 1943 was not based on empty arrogance, but on cold mathematics that they believed were on their side. From December 7, 1941 onward, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Force demonstrated astonishing results that astounded military experts. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese lost only 29 aircraft while destroying 347 enemy planes. In the Philippines, the loss ratio was 7-103 in Japan's favor. Over Darwin, they lost just 2 aircraft, destroying 30. The British Far East Fleet lost all its aircraft, and the air forces of the Dutch East Indies were decimated in a matter of days. At the heart of this superiority was the Mitsubishi A6M Nero, known as the Zero, an aircraft that revolutionized fighter design. When American engineers acquired captured models and conducted tests in 1942, they refused to believe the data. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower capable of destroying virtually any target seemed to embody the impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would later become one of Japan's most successful aces with 87 confirmed victories, left a vivid description of the Zero in his diary. Flying the Zero is like gaining wings. The aircraft responds to the slightest thought, not just mechanical input from the controls. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters on the same principle as cars, heavy, overly strong, and inefficient. The Japanese Zero fighter achieved outstanding performance through an innovative design approach. Its construction extensively used super-strong duralumin, a special aluminum alloy, which reduced its weight by 30% compared to American counterparts. In pursuit of maximum performance, designers sacrificed pilot protection, foregoing armor plates. To further lighten the aircraft, self-sealing fuel tanks were not installed, and sometimes even radio equipment was removed. Every gram of weight was sacrificed for flight characteristics. In early 1943, Japanese intelligence received the first information about the new American F6F Hellcat fighter from neutral Swedish sources. However, the reported specifications seemed incredible and were dismissed as propaganda or disinformation. According to these figures, the Hellcat's loaded weight was 5,527 kg, while the Zero weighed only 2,631 kg. The American fighter's wing area was 31 m. It was equipped with a bulky radial engine, had armor protection, bulletproof glass, self-sealing fuel tanks with a capacity of 946 liters, and an ammunition load of 2,400 rounds. Captain Minoru Genda, the brilliant strategist who devised the Pearl Harbor attack plan, studied the Hellcat's specifications at the Combined Fleet headquarters. In his analysis, preserved in Japanese military archives, he dismissively noted that the Americans had learned nothing from the past, and the Hellcat was a continuation of their failed strategy, an attempt to compensate for a lack of pilot skill through technical characteristics. Genda was confident that the Zero would easily outmaneuver it in aerial combat. Mathematical calculations seemed to confirm his belief. The Zero's wing loading was 107 kg, providing a turn radius of 186 meters. Meanwhile, the Hellcat's wing loading of 178 kg indicated a turn radius of over 274 meters. Thus, in a dogfight, which was the cornerstone of Japanese aerial combat tactics, the Hellcat was expected to be at a disadvantage. Battle in the skies, first encounter with the Hellcat. On September 30th, 1943, near Marcus Island, an aerial battle unfolded, marking the first confrontation between Japanese pilots and the new American fighter. Senior Warrant Officer Yoshio Fukui, escorting a reconnaissance mission, suddenly spotted 6 dark blue silhouettes rapidly approaching from the southeast. A thought flashed through his mind, later recorded in his report: B-25 bombers flying an odd course. However, the formation of aircraft soon turned, and Fukui unmistakably recognized the characteristic outlines: a single engine, a massive fuselage, and wings disproportionately short for such a large machine. First engagement with an F6F type fighter, he concisely noted in his report. His initial impression was misleading. The Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber. Without losing time, Fukui engaged, intending to use the standard tactics that had brought him many victories in the past. The Japanese ace's favorite maneuver involved using the Zero's superior maneuverability to get on an enemy's tail. Fukui confidently executed a diving turn, expecting the clumsy American fighter to continue flying straight, presenting an ideal position for a 6 o'clock attack. But instead of the anticipated outcome, something extraordinary happened. The Hellcat didn't evade or attempt to replicate the Zero's maneuver. Instead, it sharply climbed vertically. Its powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, developing an impressive 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the 130 horsepower Nakajima Sakai, propelled the Hellcat skyward with unstoppable force, climbing at 1,067 meters per minute. Fukui, desperately trying to keep up, felt his zero speed inexorably drop as the lightweight fighter struggled against gravity. At 4,072 meters, the Hellcat performed an incredible maneuver, seemingly impossible for an aircraft of its weight. A hammerhead stall turn allowed it to rapidly shed speed and position itself directly behind a stunned Fukui. Fukui, the Japanese pilot, shared his recollections of the encounter with American fighters, describing the intensity of their fire. The American opened fire from 400 meters. There were 6 machine guns firing, not 4 as we had assumed. The density of fire was simply incredible. My plane took 17 hits in just 3 seconds. I only managed to escape by going into a spin. Fukui miraculously made it back to Marcos Island in his Zero, which was riddled with bullets like a sieve. Unfortunately, his wingman, Junior Warrant Officer Masao, and the reconnaissance plane they were escorting did not return from the mission. This engagement marked the Hellcat's first combat baptism, a paradoxical outcome given its weight. The paradox of its weight became evident on October 5, 1943, when Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Shiga scrambled 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what seemed like another routine raid. For months, American carriers had employed hit-and-run tactics, launching raids and retreating before Japanese fighters could engage in serious combat. This time, however, things were different. We gained an altitude of 6,100 meters, Shiga wrote in his diary. Directly below us were 12 F6F fighters, divided into 3 divisions. We had complete superiority, altitude, a favorable position, and the element of surprise. Victory seemed inevitable. Following the famous engagement, Japanese aerial tactics suffered a crushing collapse. While the nimble Zeros dove on the American Hellcats, US pilots abandoned their usual evasion and turning maneuvers. Instead, they maintained a tight formation, skillfully using gentle dives to preserve high speed and energy. Japanese pilots, relying on luck, opened fire from extreme distances, but the Hellcats steadfastly withstood the barrage. The American fighters' protection was impressive. 96 kilos of armor plates shielded the pilot. 50 kilos of armor protected the oil system, and self-sealing fuel tanks absorbed numerous hits. When the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in their swift attacks, the Hellcats counter-attacked. Eschewing close-range dogfighting, American pilots capitalized on the superiority in weight and power. Rapidly gaining altitude, they brought their machines into the thinner atmosphere, where the Zero's engines began to suffer from oxygen starvation. At 7,120 meters, the Hellcat still delivered a formidable 1,750 horsepower, while the Zero's power dropped to 900. Japanese pilot Shiga bitterly recalled, "They swooped down on us like hawks on defenseless sparrows. Their weight gave them an undeniable speed advantage." They dove, opened fire with their 6 terrifying guns, and then climbed steeply, leaving us no chance to counter. The battle's outcome was staggering. 8 Zeros were shot down, while the Hellcats suffered no losses. Tanemisu, Prophecy of the Mariana Turkey Shoot, November 11th, 1943, Rabaul. The pilots of the 204th Air Group watched intently as Lieutenant Commander Toshio Tanemisu explained the intricacies of American air combat tactics. Tanemisu, a celebrated ace with 32 enemy aircraft shot down, was one of the few who had survived countless encounters with Hellcats. His words sounded like a death knell for old methods. Forget everything you were taught before. The Americans have rewritten the rules of air warfare. They no longer seek a fair fight. They act like cold-blooded executioners, not noble warriors. Tanemisu revealed the bitter truth that Japanese pilots were gradually realizing at the cost of their lives. The Hellcat was not designed to outmaneuver the Zero. Its designers aimed to eliminate the need for such a capability altogether. The core of American pilot tactics was energy fighting, where speed and altitude played a crucial role. Hellcat pilots expertly converted potential energy into kinetic energy, unleashing swift, devastating attacks on the enemy, leaving Zero pilots no chance to leverage their strengths. They operate in coordinated pairs, Tanemisu emphasized. One takes altitude, the other covers from below. While you try to evade one, the other is already on your tail. The radios, which we once mocked for being cumbersome, ensure perfect coordination. We fight like solitary samurai, each for himself. They, however, fight as a single, ruthless machine. The Technological Chasm, December 1943. The serene waters of Truk Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, once the triumphant leader of the Pearl Harbor attack, now served as the Combined Fleet's Air Operations Officer. Inspecting the damaged Zeros returning from aerial battles, twisted in encounters with American Hellcats, he noted with alarm the growing technological chasm between Japanese and American aviation. The difference in firepower was stark, reflected in dry but undeniable figures. 6 heavy Browning M2 machine guns, mounted on the Hellcats, unleashed a torrent of fire on the enemy, each firing 750 rounds per minute, totaling an impressive 4,500 shots per minute. Each 12.7mm round, weighing 46 grams, flew towards its target and at 884 mpms, carrying a destructive energy of 4,145 joules. Meanwhile, the Zero's 7.7mm machine guns fired projectiles weighing only 11 grams, reaching a speed of 701 milliliters and possessing an energy of just 1,017 joules. Even more alarming were reports of Americans using radar guidance for their fighters. While Japanese pilots, relying on outdated methods, depended on sight to detect the enemy, Hellcat pilots received precise target coordinates from shipboard radar operators, capable of detecting Japanese aircraft up to 80 km away. Lieutenant Sadamitsu Kumachi, who survived his first radar-controlled interception, bitterly recalled, "We were climbing through thick clouds when we were suddenly attacked. No warning, no visual contact with the enemy. The Hellcats swooped down on us from nowhere, precisely on our course, perfectly positioned. They knew everything about our location, altitude, and course. We were blind kittens fighting those who could see in absolute darkness." Formula for failure: the tragedy of Japanese aviation. During the war, January 1944 marked a turning point, exposing a critical issue within the ranks of Japanese pilots. Even before the war, the Imperial Japanese Navy was renowned for its rigorous and lengthy pilot training program. A 3-year course, including 700 flight hours, transformed pilots into true virtuosos of aerial combat. Army pilots also kept pace, accumulating no less than 500 flight hours. They were not merely pilots, but masters of aerial acrobatics, expert marksmen, and connoisseurs of the spiritual philosophy of war in the sky. By 1944, however, the situation had sharply deteriorated. Naval pilots entered combat with only 300 flight hours under their belts, and Army pilots even fewer, 200 hours. A severe fuel shortage meant that most training had to be conducted in gliders. The number of practice rounds was limited to 50 per pilot. Crucial training elements such as formation flying, instrument flying, and radio communication were eliminated from the curriculum to rush pilots to the front as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, American pilots arrived at the front with substantial experience, boasting at least 300 flight hours, including 50 hours on a specific aircraft type. They fired thousands of practice rounds, mastered carrier landings through repetition, and studied combat tactics safely over Texas airfields. The contrast was stark, and it predetermined the outcome of many aerial battles. The tragedy of pilot training in the Japanese Navy. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, responsible for pilot training at Kasumigaura Naval Air Base, expressed profound concern in his final report. "We are sending untrained youngsters to certain death, pitting them against seasoned professionals." He cited the example of Ensign Yamamoto, who, upon arriving at the front, had no experience firing airborne weapons because there was no ammunition for training. Furthermore, he had never flown at night due to severe fuel shortages. As a result, in his first and last battle, he lasted only 7 minutes. The Battle of Formosa, a bitter disappointment. From October 12 to 16, 1944, a fierce battle unfolded over Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudomi, commander of the Second Air Fleet, desperately tried to halt the massive American air raids on the island. All available forces were committed to the fight, including the last newly trained pilots from training squadrons based in Japan itself. Japanese command reported a grand victory, claiming the sinking of 26 enemy aircraft carriers and battleships and the destruction of 300 enemy aircraft. However, as soon became clear after the return of surviving pilots and analysis of gun camera footage, the reality was entirely different. The Americans lost only 89 aircraft, while Japanese losses amounted to 329 machines and almost all experienced pilots, an irreplaceable blow to Japanese aviation. In the skies of war, a pilot's perspective. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, a celebrated veteran of Japanese aviation who endured the crucible of battle, left a chilling testament in his memoirs about a tragedy that once unfolded. Then he wrote of how American Hellcats dominated the air, ambushing Japanese planes at any altitude. According to Akamatsu, American fighters divided the airspace into sectors, with an entire division patrolling each. It was not a battle, but a methodical extermination, the pilot recalled. The Great Mariana Turkey Shoot, which unfolded on June 19, 1944 in the Philippine Sea, became the culmination of the confrontation between the Japanese and US carrier fleets. The Japanese fleet, having healed its wounds from previous defeats, committed its rebuilt carrier forces to battle as part of Operation Ago. The objective was to crush American carrier power in the Pacific. This desperate attempt involved 9 aircraft carriers carrying 450 aircraft piloted by the best of Japan's remaining aviators. Opposing them was Task Force 58, comprising 15 aircraft carriers and 956 aircraft, among which 415 formidable F6F Hellcats stood out. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the Japanese fleet, launched an offensive by sending 4 waves of aircraft into attack. He hoped that the superior skill of his pilots and the greater range of the Zero would allow them to gain the upper hand over the Americans. The first wave, consisting of 69 aircraft, took to the air at 0830. American radar detected the approaching enemy at a distance of 240 kilometers. Hellcats were vectored for interception, taking an ideal position for attack. They had the advantage of altitude, the sun at their backs, and approached from the blind spots of the Japanese aircraft. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, noticed the Hellcats minutes before the engagement. They were arrayed in echelons from 6,100 to 9,350 meters, no less than 60 machines, like a steel wall waiting for us. We were at 5,1086 meters. All advantages were on their side. The battle lasted only 12 minutes. In that short time, 42 Japanese aircraft were shot down, a harbinger of the coming rout. A true slaughter unfolded in the sky, where American pilots demonstrated their overwhelming superiority. Commander David McCampbell, an experienced commander of Air Group 15, managed to send 7 enemy aircraft to their demise in a single day. His loyal wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, kept pace, destroying 6 enemy machines. The Japanese Zeros desperately tried to maneuver to escape us, McCampbell recalled, but we were relentless. We came in from above, shot them down one by one, and then rapidly gained altitude. They tried to replicate our maneuvers, lost control, and became easy prey for other Hellcats. By the end of this tragic day for the Japanese, they had lost 346 carrier-based aircraft, as well as 50 land-based machines. American losses were incomparably small, only 30 aircraft from all courses. That evening, in the ready rooms, American pilots, amazed by the ease of their victory, dubbed the event the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Enemy planes seemed helpless, like defenseless game before hunters. The Leyte Gulf Record. On October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Commander David McCampbell set his personal record for the number of aircraft shot down in a single mission. Leading a group of 7 Hellcats from the aircraft carrier, USS Essex, he encountered an armada of 60 Japanese aircraft heading towards the American fleet. In a fierce 90-minute engagement, McCampbell personally destroyed 9 enemy machines, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers. His wingman, Roy Rushing, also displayed heroism, shooting down another 6 aircraft. After destroying the 9th enemy, I ran out of ammunition, McCampbell remembered. The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout the fight. Not a single bullet hit my plane, despite us being outnumbered 8-1. This battle vividly demonstrated the complete shift in the balance of the air power. 7 Hellcats routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 of them without any losses to their side. McCampbell's 2 outstanding missions, in which he shot down 7 aircraft on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him well-deserved accolades, the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The cross that burns the soul. Psychological breakdown. After the crushing defeats in the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf, Japanese military psychologists documented a widespread Hellcat psychosis among surviving aces. Admiral Osawa, in his analysis of the events, stated, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter interception reached unimaginable heights, transforming aerial combat into something resembling an industrial conveyor belt. Each Hellcat ceased to be merely an aircraft, becoming a cog in a vast machine. Our pilots, no matter their skill, were no longer fighting individual machines, but a soulless system." The critical shortage of experienced pilots forced the Japanese command by early 1945 to reduce training programs to a laughable 40-50 hours for naval aviation and 60-70 hours for army aviation. Kamikaze pilots, in fact, embarked on their final flight with only 40 to 50 hours of flight time, equivalent to a week of training. Apocalypse over Okinawa. April to June 1945 became the arena for Operation Iceberg. Japanese aviation unleashed approximately 1,900 kamikaze-piloted aircraft against the American fleet off Okinawa. In these hellish conditions, the Hellcat transformed from a fighter into a shield, defending against desperate suicide attacks, Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, commander of a flying circus squadron of Hellcats, became a true terror in the Japanese skies, shooting down 23 enemy aircraft during the campaign. His innovative tactics based on using four-plane sections in coordinated attacks negated traditional Japanese suicidal attack tactics. We developed what we called the mower, Valencia recalled. 4 Hellcats, flying in combat formation with 90-meter intervals, would sweep through formations of Japanese aircraft at enormous speed. Each pilot was responsible for his firing sector. We made one pass, gained altitude, and repeated the maneuver. The ruthless arithmetic of the Okinawa campaign spoke for itself. Hellcats flew 38,038 sorties, claiming 2,351 victories for 249 losses, an impressive ratio of 9.5:1. Most importantly, they thwarted the plans of approximately 80% of kamikaze pilots, preventing them from reaching their targets. The technological chasm. By 1945, the technological gap between the US and Japan had reached a critical point, becoming an insurmountable obstacle for Japanese aviation. The American F6F Hellcat fighter was equipped with a series of advanced improvements that significantly enhanced its combat effectiveness. These included a water injection system, which could boost engine power to 2,200 horsepower, and the presence of unguided rockets for attacking ground and air targets. Improved armor protection ensured greater aircraft survivability in combat, and the K-14 computing gun sight automatically calculated the necessary lead for firing, significantly increasing accuracy. The legendary Japanese ace, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, credited with 28 official victories. Modern historians estimate closer to 15 first encountered Hellcats in June 1944. Despite his extensive experience and outstanding skill, he barely survived his first aerial engagement. In his autobiography, Sakai recalled, "I performed the most complex acrobatic maneuvers I was capable of, loops, rolls, split S's, all the techniques honed in over 200 aerial dogfights. But the Hellcat effortlessly replicated all my moves, as if playing carelessly. I only survived thanks to a mistake made by the American pilot. He forgot to jettison his external fuel tank before the battle began, accounting for human losses. By the end of World War II, F6F Hellcat fighters demonstrated impressive results, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. American losses, meanwhile, totaled only 270 machines shot down by Japanese fighters. Thus, the victory-to-loss ratio stood at an astounding 19.3:1. Hellcat pilots accounted for 305 U.S. Navy aces, representing 75% of all American naval air victories. At the same time, Japan's human losses were truly catastrophic. Of the 18,000 experienced naval aviators who entered the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained alive by August 1945. The tragic formula of kamikaze. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation, once proud of its elite pilots, into a tool for suicidal kamikaze attacks, was a bitter acknowledgement of the unequivocal superiority of American Hellcats. Recognizing their inability to compete within the framework of a traditional military doctrine, Japan resorted to a desperate measure, turning its aviators into living guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who went down in history as the ideological inspiration for the kamikaze program, cynically justified this step by appealing to the ruthless logic of mathematical calculations. If a Zero pilot attempts to attack an aircraft carrier using conventional combat methods, his chances of success are virtually zero. he will inevitably be destroyed by Hellcats, superior in every parameter. However, if that same 0 is packed with explosives and directed at the target as a bomb, the probability of hitting the target increases to 30%. In any case, the pilot is doomed to die. But, at least by accepting death as a kamikaze, he does not die in vain, but for a higher purpose. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, a celebrated Japanese ace, escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki. During this sortie, Nishizawa achieved his last 86th and 87th victories, shooting down 2 American F6F Hellcats. However, the very next day, October 26, 1944, tragic irony befell Nishizawa himself. He perished while a passenger in a transport plane that was shot down by Hellcats from VF-14 Squadron. Japan's greatest ace, rendered helpless without his fighter, fell at the hands of the very aircraft he had so skillfully engaged in aerial battles. The final chord. August 15, 1945 was the day Emperor Hirohito's voice announced Japan's surrender. At Atsugi Air Base, Captain Minoru Genda, who had previously criticized the American Hellcat for its brute power and dominating Japanese elegance, listened intently to the monarch's words. Around him were the remnants of Japanese naval aviation, young pilots with barely 40 hours of flight time, aircraft assembled from salvaged parts, and virtually empty fuel tanks. On that same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, taking off from the USS Belleauwood, achieved the last aerial victory of World War II, shooting down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 14th hound loss. The Japanese pilot, likely unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns brought the air war in the Pacific to a close. Occupation, the moment of truth. In September 1945 at Atsugi Airfield, the first American aircraft to touch down after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcat fighters from the USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, technicians, and ground personnel lined the runway to get a close look at their recent tormentor. The triumph of the Hellcat, a display of power and engineering. Superiority. American ace Lieutenant Robert Vasco, credited with 19 aerial victories, vividly demonstrated the outstanding capabilities of the Hellcat fighter to Japanese pilots. His masterful piloting, which included breathtaking loops, rolls, and rapid climbs, maneuvers that would have been fatal for a Zero, left the Japanese awestruck. "You must realize," Vasco emphasized through an interpreter, "that this is far from its limit. In combat conditions, with water injection, engine power increases by 20%. The aircraft's structure is designed for overloads up to 13 G. I never managed to damage it." Engineering analysis revealed the true scale of American industrial superiority. Japanese engineers, gaining access to captured Hellcats after the war, were astonished by the scale of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine consisted of 2,140 precisely manufactured parts, each interchangeable with any other R2800 engine part. In contrast, the Nakajima Sakai engine required manual fitting of components, making each instance unique. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the creator of the Zero, thoroughly studied the Hellcat after the war. His conclusion was disheartening. "We designed an airplane that met the requirements of 1941. The Americans created an aviation system geared for 1945. While we honed the mastery of the sword, they were building an industrial age." Triumph of industry. The Hellcat, as a symbol of an era. The Hellcat production process by Grumman itself became a powerful weapon in the Allied arsenal. The factory, located in Bethpage, New York, operated continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. During peak productivity, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every hour. In just 30 months, the company produced 12,275 aircraft of this model, a true feat unattainable for Japanese industry. In 1944, Japan managed to produce 5,100 fighters of all types. In the same year, the United States produced 35,000 fighters alone. The American production system incorporated innovative approaches that seemed unimaginable to Japanese observers. Workers, using visual, color-coded instructions for assembling complex components, round-the-clock operations across multiple shifts, and maintaining high-quality standards despite rapid production. Strategic revolution, the Hellcat, and a new era in naval warfare. The Hellcat didn't just win aerial battles, it brought about a true revolution in naval strategy. According to pre-war doctrine, aircraft carriers were considered vulnerable targets that needed to launch a preemptive strike to ensure their survival. The Hellcat completely changed this perception. Aircraft carriers transformed into true aerial fortresses capable of withstanding and repelling any enemy air attacks. The Hellcat's transformation into a symbol of air dominance became evident to Commander Task Force 58, Admiral Mark Mitcher. He expressed confidence that with the advent of the F6F, there was no longer a need to actively seek out the enemy. American pilots could now allow the enemy to attack, secure in the Hellcat's ability to destroy them at any moment. This newfound confidence paved the way for unprecedented offensive operations. U.S. carrier strike groups could cruise near enemy shores for weeks, knowing that the umbrella of Hellcats provided them with virtually complete invulnerability from air attacks. But the Hellcat was not merely a technological breakthrough. It embodied a cultural and philosophical chasm that rendered Japanese military doctrine obsolete. While the Japanese samurai tradition emphasized individual skill, spiritual strength, and a readiness to die, the Hellcat symbolized systemic efficiency, material superiority, and a commitment to preserving pilots' lives. This profound philosophical difference meant that Japanese pilots were unable to adapt to the Hellcat's tactics, even when understanding their essence. The very idea of disengaging from an unfavorable fight, fundamental to the Hellcat's doctrine, was utterly alien to Japanese aviators, raised in the spirit of Bushido. Bushido, a look through the lens of history. In 1962, long after the final shots of the Pacific War had faded, the United States Navy organized a unique symposium dedicated to the aerial battles of that era. At this gathering, veterans from both sides, American and Japanese aviators, came together to analyze the conflict from a historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, a celebrated American naval ace with 34 enemy aircraft shot down, stated clearly and concisely, "The Hellcat fighter was the decisive factor in the air war in the Pacific. It simply destroyed Japanese aviation, making our victory inevitable." In response, Commander Saburo Sakai, an experienced Japanese pilot, remarked, "The Zero was certainly a superior fighter, but the Hellcat was a magnificent weapon system. We didn't realize this difference for a long time, and the realization came too late. We were like going into a gunfight with swords and wondering why we were losing. The final verdict, mathematics of war. The Hellcat's superiority over Japanese fighters can be expressed in simple yet eloquent figures that reveal a profound historical truth. The overall victory-to-loss ratio was an impressive 19,1, and specifically against the Zero, it was 13,1. Over 30 months, 12,275 Hellcat fighters were produced, while Zero production between 1943 and 1945 amounted to approximately 6,000 units. More than 5,000 American pilots were trained on Hellcats, whereas by August 1945, fewer than 100 combat-ready pilots remained in the Japanese military. These figures vividly demonstrate the overwhelming imbalance of forces and resources that played a decisive role in the outcome of the air war in the Pacific. Admiral Jisaburo Osawa's fleet, cruising the Philippine Sea, faced a harsh reality that he articulated with disarming frankness. We ridiculed the Hellcat, not realizing that it was not just an aircraft, but the embodiment of a new approach to war, an entire civilization. The irony of fate was that by the time the Japanese realized their mistake, their air force had ceased to exist. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, who lived into the new millennium, gave a comprehensive assessment of the Hellcat in his last interview, reflecting its absolute superiority. He noted that while the Zero elevated Japan to the status of a great naval power, the Hellcat forced it to realize that this greatness was an illusion. Sakai bitterly acknowledged that Japanese pilots who considered themselves samurai were in reality just men with outdated weapons, confronting an inexorable future. Every Japanese pilot fortunate enough to survive the war did so only by the grace of a Hellcat pilot. In these words resonated the bitter recognition of ultimate defeat, an existence dependent on the will of the enemy. The entry into service of the F6F Hellcat marked a new era in aerial combat, as this aircraft, twice the weight of the Zero, was a true triumph of engineering. Unlike its Japanese counterpart, the Hellcat was equipped with armor that protected the pilot and a powerful engine unavailable to Japanese industry. Its armament was unsurpassed, its radar undetectable, and its pilot's training level unattainable for Japanese aces. Hellcat production proceeded at a pace that the land of the rising sun simply could not imagine. Initially, Japanese pilots mocked the Hellcat, failing to understand that every additional pound of weight was not a weakness, but a symbol of the power of an industrial democracy capable of protecting its warriors. However, when realization dawned, laughter turned to death letters home, mockery to desperate kamikaze missions, and confidence to utter collapse. The Hellcat didn't just defeat the Zero, it dispelled the very philosophy of war, proving that in modern warfare, victory belongs not to those with the best warriors, but to those capable of creating a more superior system. Japanese pilots laughed at the F6F Hellcat, but as history showed, the Hellcat had the last laugh, and it always did.